Hey, everybody. Welcome to, I guess, OT Cyber Tuesday, as we're calling it these days. So I appreciate everybody for coming. This is, I think, probably fifth or sixth week we've been doing these every week. So again, I really appreciate everybody for coming and being here. Um, this week, I wanted to go back to a favorite topic, talking about OSINT. We're going to look at using two of the more popular OSINT tools. So we're going to look at Shodan, which is one that most folks I think are familiar with, and then ZoomEye is one that's recently evolved over the last year or two. I think for most folks at least in the U.S. where I'm at, that are becoming more familiar with it, it's actually a Chinese-based tool. So there's always interesting conversations around that, but at the same time, it's one where I find it interesting to look at to see how the two different tools work and kind of what one sees and what doesn't, and vice versa. So so we shall see. So Abby, welcome. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming. Vitali, welcome. Thanks for coming. It's everybody between LinkedIn and YouTube. So before we do get started, I did want to make sure I thanked the sponsors uh, for uh, for this session. So um, Macrium Software, I started talking with them because for me, the number one security control that we have in OT cybersecurity is backup and recovery, which is what they focus on. But many of you know or have heard of me, talk about you recent incidents like Jaguar Land Rover, right, where they had all of their global manufacturing down for 5 weeks before they just started to get back up and running. And obviously, they had some major failures when it came to backing up what was important in the environment to run operations. And then, of course, being able to restore that in a timely manner. And so that's why every environment we know is going to be compromised eventually. And so, are we prepared? That's why I always put backup and recovery as my number one control. It's not necessarily that fun or exciting or sexy to talk about, and yet again, it's we need to make sure, right, that we nail the backup and recovery process, because we're going to rely on those backups one day, hopefully much later down the road, but we want to make sure that we are able to rely on them. So again, special thanks to Macram for sponsoring this session, and for those folks on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn post tomorrow is all about backup and recovery in OT, and they actually put a best practices guide together for everyone, which is free, which is really cool. And so the kind of infographic, right, provides an overview of that. So definitely more to talk about tomorrow. But again, special thanks to them. So hi Claudia, welcome. Michael, welcome. I'm going to be in Houston in April, so I'm really excited. I can announce now that I'm doing the keynote at or a keynote. I don't know. They have multiple keynotes at OTSecCon in April, so I'm really excited. April 1st and 2nd. So definitely for folks in the Houston area, definitely check out OTSecCon. Definitely love to see everybody there and meet folks. It's always great to meet folks in person. So so Kasim, welcome. Azim, thank you for coming. Moises, thanks for coming. It's good to see you. I appreciate everybody for jumping in. So I didn't necessarily prepare any slides for today. Guido, thanks for coming. It's more of a, I guess, kind of practical walkthrough. So Anthony, welcome from all the way from Nairobi. I have a couple friends out there. Um, let's one thing. And let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm just going to share out the. Oh, that's true. Sometimes when you share out the entire screen, it freaks out in in the platform. So I'm just going to go ahead and share one tab at a time. But so this is, if you go to mikeholcomb.com, Many of you probably at this point have heard me talk about how wonderful my girlfriend is, and she redid the entire website, and she took all of the infographics and resources that I have on LinkedIn, and she put them in one place, which is super nice. So if you go to mikeholcomb.com and then you click on resources, and then go to OT ICS infographics. And so what you'll see is, of course, again, ton of infographics. I think this is most of them. I think there's probably a few that have slipped through the cracks, but you can see about halfway down, there's one for Shodan. And I think this is a really good reference to help you get started in using Shodan to find control systems that are exposed to the internet. Now, remember that Shodan actually started as a way to find control systems that were exposed to the internet. So I remember and I remember hearing of Shodan, like, I think it was like, I want to say it was like right before Stuxnet, maybe like a year, maybe two. I don't think it had been around very long at that point, but I do remember where Jonathan Matherly had created Shodan. I think there were three other folks that he worked with to create the platform. And I remember seeing they're talking about, hey, we found this power plant on the internet, or we found these traffic lights on the internet, right? And you can actually log into these systems without credentials, right? You can access these credentials, I guess, no real login, and you can make changes to the environment. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. Plus, they showed the HMIs, right? The human machine interface, the GUI that'll allow us to see. So you might see a turbine inside a power plant, or the traffic light, right? With the yellow, green, red, at least for us in the unit US, for that setup, and where you could go in and you could make changes to these systems. So thankfully, since like 2009, 2010, the number of control systems and other assets that are exposed to the internet has dropped dramatically. But there's still some out there, right? And if anything, we just want to make sure that we don't have any of our own assets for ourselves or for clients that we work with, right? We want to make sure that they don't have any exposures to the internet. So you can find again this cheat sheet on MikeHolcomb.com. I actually have an older cheat sheet, which was something that I had put together like actually back in the day when Shodan was first around, and they actually used it on their website for for a while. And there's little bits and pieces of it still there, which is kind of funny. I'll kind of point those out. That was like, I guess, my first type of content. I created a cheat sheet for Shodan and Census, which is kind of a competitor to Shodan, and we'll talk a little bit about today. And and then I didn't create anything for, I don't know, 15 years. But so let me go ahead and share out the um, Shodan tab, so we can start with our friends at Shodan. So Achi Cobb, hopefully I didn't butcher that too much. Welcome. Sanjay, thanks for coming. Claudia, yes, Claudia's in New York City. Hopefully, we're going to be there in a couple months. So I'm going to wait for it to warm up maybe a little bit. So Omar, thanks for coming all the way from Egypt. So Vrinder from India, thanks for coming. Anonymous LinkedIn user, thanks for being here. There's a few of you out there. So Haseen, thanks for coming from Tunisia. Oh, so couple of folks kind of in our neighbors out there. Kieran, thanks for coming, and Quincy. So thanks for coming. So and we'll talk about, there are definitely some honeypots out there, right? And if you're not familiar with a honeypot, right, the honeypot is a system that it's not necessarily a real system. It's one that's built simply to be a target, right? It's simply built there to attract, essentially be there for attackers to find, and then the attackers to do what they do, right? Try to break into the system, try to do reconnaissance against it, try to exploit vulnerabilities and gain access. And And so it's all about watching what attackers are, so you can learn what attackers are doing. And I'm hoping to have actually a session around honeypots and then OT honeypots coming up in January. So probably just after the holidays. So really excited about that. But so this is the Shodan main page when you log in. Now, if you click on Explore, the first thing you actually see is industrial control systems. Again, this is where Shodan started. And I remember seeing this. This page has not changed since the very beginning. And they talk about, oh, what are some terms like SCADA and PLC and DCS? And the idea is that you can look through this page. What this page is, it's a list of the commonly used protocols in OT or ICS environments. And so you can see things like Modbus, right? Modbus is by far the number one protocol we have in OT. It's open source. It's not tied to a vendor. Like with S7, which you see next, right? S7 is for Siemens, right? Great protocol, very similar, like in functionality, something like Modbus, right? It gets the job done, but right, it's proprietary and to Siemens. So we'll see it with Siemens equipment, right? And of course, there's a expensive license that goes with that. Right? DMP3, which we see a lot in electrical or electricity, right? Power, right? Things like BACnet for building automation control. And so think of everything from elevators to door badge systems and heating and air conditioning. Ethernet IP is another big one. We'll actually see some really interesting examples around Ethernet IP, SIP over Ethernet IP for things like Rockwell and broadly PLCs that we'll see. So quite a few to look at. So and don't forget, if you have questions as we go along, just go ahead and drop them in the chat. So Mary, thanks for coming from Toronto. I'm going to Calgary in March, so I'm excited about that to see my favorite band these days, July Talk. They're back on tour. They're a Canadian band, so you pretty much have to go to Canada to see them. So Rodrigo, thanks for coming. Zayad, thanks for coming. So Ramara, thanks for coming. I appreciate you for coming. Again, another all the way from India. So see, there's a question for anonymous LinkedIn user. Is it necessary to open from a VM or safe to access from a base machine? I with Shodan, I'm not concerned with security. I guess if people were ultra, cautious or privacy focused, you probably look at doing this with a VM over something like Tor with an anonymous account. I'm not worried about that. I think some people, maybe, if you're using ZoomEye, which is based in China, if you're from a country like the United States, you might be a little cautious around that. You know, but kind of leave that up to you know folks, kind of use their own judgment on that. Like I said, I'm not worried about either. So especially, I'm really just using it for educational purposes. I'll use Shodan for clients for sure. But yeah, can you paste this link, please? Oh yeah, if you go to so the Shodan link it's shodan.io. I think Shodan.com was purchased by some nefarious folks, and then we're hosting malware, I think, on there. And so a lot of browsers will block that. You can get a basic free account with Shodan, and I think it gives you, I think, 2 pages of results. So there's definitely something, and you can actually still do queries through the API as well. But the really cool thing is, even though this only happens once a year, is that Shodan does a fire sale where you can get a lifetime account for $5. Basically, their professional or kind of like their pen tester consultant account for $5 for a lifetime. It used to be on Black Friday, which was the day after Thanksgiving in the United States, which we just had. But then they started just doing it at a random time every year because I think maybe they had too many people sign up. I'm not. I'm not sure why else you would kind of randomize it like that. But so I always suggest folks, follow their LinkedIn page because they announce it there. Of course, they're all their other social media platforms as well. And then if I ever catch it, I think the last 2 years I've caught it and posted it out for everybody. So I know some folks have been able to take advantage of it. Otherwise, that same account is $50 a month. So it's definitely a big difference. With ZoomEye, I did also, they had a lifetime membership for $150, not as cheap as a Shodan, but 150 for lifetime on Black Friday. So I went ahead and got that because I figured I would regret it if I didn't. So um, let's see. Bien asks, is it possible to hide an open port from the general Shodan scans? Depends on the port. So it's a great question because Shodan only scans a couple, it's like 5 or 6 dozen TCP ports and then a small handful of UDP ports. They are not scanning all of the ports that are available on an IP address, right? There's 65,535 TCP ports and the same number for UDP ports. So if you're worried about Shodan, then you could find a common port and you could put it on there. But do you really need these? Yeah, I would first ask, what do you have running on that port, and does that need to be exposed to the internet in the first place? Really, should it be behind some type of VPN appliance, behind some type of firewall that restricts who can access it, from over the internet? So by default, we typically don't want to expose things to the internet unless we want everybody to see them. And then at that point, right, you want to put them on common ports like a website on port 80 or 443. But hopefully that answers your question. So Landra, thanks for coming. Actor, welcome. So um, and see, we'll come back to Kieran. We'll come back to your question in a uh, minute. So looking at Shodan, and this is where I created the cheat sheet, because if we're looking at this kind of page that's supposed to say, hey, we're going to help you fund different control systems. Again, when this page first came out back in, again, somewhere around like probably 2008, 2009, 2010, you could click on Explore Modbus and find a lot of things of interest, right? That is not what happens today. Because if you click on Explore Modbus, what happens is it says, oh, okay, we're going to run a search in Shodan. And Shodan scans the entire internet for a couple of dozen, like maybe 5 or 6 main, dozen TCP ports, and again, a few UDP ports. And you can see it just says, okay, anywhere you see TCP 502 open, show me that IP address. And you can see, wow, there's 700,000 of these on the internet. Well, these are not 700,000 control systems, right? These are just 700,000 IP addresses on the internet that have TCP 502 open. That's it. I can choose, and this kind of kind of along the lines of BN's question is, you can put any service or application right on any port. So if I want to run Modbus on, I don't know, TCP 80, like which we normally set for a website, you could still do that. Now, are you going to get the greatest functionality? Probably not. It's going to cause a lot of work, right, to get it to actually function. So anybody can put anything on like TCP 502. So even though, sure, TCP 502 is the default port for Modbus, the vast majority of these hosts, these are just hosts. If you start looking through these are just hosts on the internet that they'll actually respond to every single port request to say, yes, the port is open. So you see that they have tens of thousands of ports open. Well, those aren't real assets. It's somebody screwing with you, right? So for some, they think it's going to make it better security, right? Security through obscurity. So the default search for Modbus hosts is not really any good, right? And using that to try to find hosts running Modbus, which would allow us to find things like programmable logic controllers, PLCs, on the internet, right? And if you're not familiar with a PLC or a PLC, especially the ones we're seeing here, right, they have an Ethernet connection and can get exposed to the internet, like we'll see some examples here today. But then they're also physically wired into equipment in the real world. So they're monitoring and they're controlling different pieces of equipment, right? The processes, right? If I have a power plant, right, I have a turbine that's spinning. We'll have to make sure, well, how fast is that turbine spinning? Is that turbine overheating, right? Those types of things. And if, oh, what if it's going too fast? We need to slow it down. Or what if it's getting too hot? Right? We need to take action. We need to adjust. And we can do all that through systems or control systems like PLCs and also DCS and some other ones that are out there. But you'll start to get an idea how we can find these. So Shodan's still a great tool because when it finds an open port, remember, it'll send additional requests, just like if you're familiar with Nmap as a port scanner and you're doing something like a service scan. It sends additional requests to try to get more information from that port to try to determine, okay, what's actually running on this port. This port is 502. Is it really Modbus or not? Right. And so that's what we start to see. So yeah, that default search, not not so great, unfortunately. So um, so Kieran Aztec says, can you recommend open source tools for OT security where we can get hands on PLCs? Yeah, if you hang on till the end, what I'll do is actually have a link, or if you look through my LinkedIn post, even for just I think the last week or so, look for the post on hack your first OT ICS system. And that actually has a simulated environment, provides some tools like the Modbus Swiss Army knife that I created using ChatGPT. And I think that's a great place for folks to start. You can also check out kind of from there, I would go to LabShock, which is another great platform for learning. Absolutely. So thanks, Guido. MD, welcome. So Gokhan, thanks for coming. So and then Claudia asks, in maritime ecosystem, is your best practice when searching for vulnerabilities like Shodan? I think you'll get an idea as we go through what you're going to look at. Like in maritime, like maritime has specific vendors more so associated with it than others. So you're going to want to do searches using those vendor names, right? And so let's look at some examples here, right? Or if we go back to the, it's partly what I was trying to show in the cheat sheet was that again, we kind of really didn't get. I was trying to make that larger, but apparently it's not doesn't doesn't allow us to. Again, just seeing if something's open on the port doesn't really help, right? So what we can do is we can look for things like manufacturers of OT or IC, right? Control systems. We can look for those names. And that's one of the more interesting ways. So we could even say, okay, keep port 502, but then also, well, tell me if you find anything with TCP 502, and then also somewhere when I get the response back, I get a vendor name like Rockwell, right? Rockwell is one of the more popular vendors. Now you can see there's not many of these hosts that are out there. There's two in India and there's one in Thailand. But you can see, and these from just off of the surface, these look like legit control systems. And so you can see, of course, the IP addresses, the public IP addresses for these. You can see the associated company. So this a National Chemical Laboratory or Laboratory. Sometimes that's actually the ISP name, but this looks a little bit more of like a specific name, right? We can even see the tag, so you can see that Shodan recognizes this as ICS, and it tags it as such. If it does have evidence that this could be a honeypot, remember one of those fake systems that created just to be hacked, right? To find attackers and watch what they're doing, then it would actually say honeypot. But just off of the surface, and I look at Shodan, I don't look at it every single day, but right, I look at it enough, and these look pretty legit. Modbus also, unfortunately, still uses the kind of the naming convention of slave and master for kind of a main system, which then controls other kind of subsystems. I think we're trying to shift that to kind of more client server. And that is also, I think, more relevant before Ethernet existed and TCP/IP now for control systems. But so we can see, right, that, oh, we're getting this Rockwell device back. We're getting some idea of, oh, the type of system that it is. And then usually we see a number like this. This is where I would ask, but I know there's a delay on the on the on the session. But that's usually where you would see something like the firmware version. So if I see the firmware version, then I can use that with the make and the model, the vendor, right, to be able to look up, hey, are there any vulnerabilities in this system that we could exploit to gain access? So that's one way that we can find assets on the internet, right? That are yeah, control systems, right? Using Shodan. So again, there we're doing okay, TCP 502, and then the name of a vendor, right? And that's kind of a big part of helps if I was sharing this. That's only drives me crazy when I forget not to change change screens. So here's what it looks like when we run that search. So now you can see, right? There's only three systems, right, that match that query. They're running Modbus, what appears to be Modbus, and using the vendor name. And so you can see, right, that we go through and here's 14.139.126.67. Looks like that's associated with the National Chemical Laboratory in India, right? And then the data that we're getting back, it does look like it's some type of control system running Modbus. Right? And then down below, yeah, we can also see, oh yeah, here's a Rockwell Automation. Bradley is also a manufacturer of control systems. They were bought by Rockwell years ago, but a lot of times you'll see both names on those assets. Maybe eventually Allen Bradley will just finally fall off. Maybe not. And then you have to remember control systems, right? A lot of these are designed to be around for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? They're designed to last. But that's some of those suggestions that you can get off of the cheat sheet. So if you actually look at kind of the initial Shodan page, they actually also give you a little cheat sheet. This is where I mentioned they've evolved it over time, but this is where I created the cheat sheet that they actually used for the website. So I grew up in San Diego, and so I had created a cheat sheet and I put in all of the information from San Diego, as you can imagine. So you can still see it still has like devices in San Diego, because I was looking for, oh, show me all assets in the city of San Diego, right? And then you used to see my zip code and you would used to, those types of things. Now that, California, now they've changed it up, but so it's kind of evolved over the years, but I thought it was kind of cool that they used it. I didn't get anything for it, but it was kind of cool that they did it. Census actually did the same thing. I think they sent an email, said thanks. So I didn't get any free accounts from anybody though, unfortunately. So sad. So, but there's a lot in kind of that cheat sheet, right? So again, the ports, the big names are what you're looking for, right? And what if we do something like now you can try something like PLC, even though right smaller, labels, right, or small number of characters, will have a small number of results. But if we do something like, well, how about programmable logic controller? What you'll see, which is one of those things I always find really interesting about OT or control system assets, is that and you can see there's 4,445 hits on devices that come back and say, "Hey, I'm a programmable logic controller," right? And what you'll see is, remember that almost every OT control system protocol that we're using still today is unauthenticated, right? Which means you're not asked for a username or password. And almost all of them have a function, essentially code or a command you can issue to say, "Tell me what you are." And it tells you, right? It literally, you're just saying, "Hey, tell me what type of system you are." And it has a menu. If you look like inside the code that's available, right? It has a list of about 20 types of assets that it could be. And in this case, it comes back and says, "Oh yeah, hey, I'm a programmable logic controller." So to find PLCs exposed on the internet, we literally just have to search for programmable logic controller. And what you see, these are a lot of, and this is very typical, right? We see a lot of these Rockwell PLCs. Mostly these are the older Allen Bradley, right? Remember they got bought by Rockwell, and we can pull these up, and we can see things like, right, the vendor make and model. And I like this because, right, we can go to Google. Let me make sure I swap screens, right? If we go to Google, right, I can run a search for that vendor make and model. So I can, I want to see, I'm a very visual person, right? That I want to be able to see that, oh, yeah, this is exactly, right, what type of system, or in this case, what type of PLC that we're actually connected to. I kind of like this one because you could see where they just cut out all the wires. Because remember, that PLC, right? It has that Ethernet connection, and it's allowing it to connect to the internet in this case. But then it also has those physical wires that go into, again, those other systems that it interacts with, and it pulls in data from things like sensors. So it has sensor data we're pulling in, but then we're making decisions based off of that sensor data to make changes to the equipment and the processes in the environment. So these 4,445 PLCs are out there. They're controlling things, they're monitoring things. Now, we don't know what they are. We just know, yeah, these exist. And then you can see other things like, oh, there's the firmware version. Right? We can see the serial number, and I guess you can call for support. And then you can see the internal IP address. You can even look at it a little closer if we go ahead and click on the IP address. Let me go ahead and share it. I'm going to try and do this with just the overall screen, and hopefully it doesn't freak out, because sometimes it does, right? Hopefully you can see that where um, oh, there's the PLC we were just looking at. But in this case, if we kind of zoom in on that one host, then we can get more information, right? So we can see, oh, it is running a web interface, right? Some PLCs do have web interfaces that you can connect to and use them for management. So in this case, it looks like there's something going on either with the PLC or the PLC's moved. So that's not going to be a good example, right? But maybe we can try this one. Um, uh, I see what they're doing on that one. I'm trying to find one that's going to be. Just going to open up a few of these. Here's another one on port 80. Oh, that one actually has a username and password to log in, which is good, right? Because we actually want to see that. We can try the website, right, on 8443. which is, oh, it's not opening because it's not realizing that it's a HTTP uh, for some reason. What? Oh, we'll try to open it just to see. We'll say, okay, yes, accept the certificate issue. There's another way to find these very easy. We can find so okay, so it's some NetCloud device. So it might could be sitting in front of the Rockwell. So it's not a Rockwell PLC. So we'll go ahead and stop that one. There's better ways to find that, and we can look at that because I want to make sure we find a couple of uh, good examples. So for going there. So thanks for coming, Karen. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and thanks for watching. So Sarah, welcome. So uh, oh, cool. Yeah, well, good luck with the rest of the interview process. So Guido's talking about Huawei controllers. Yeah, lots of I think vulnerabilities that out there. So, can you show how you look up honeypots again, please? So yeah, if we're looking at like Shodan, right? Um, Let me go back to that main search. So a lot of times what you'll see, and these are all legit the way we're looking at these. One way is that you can do tag honeypot. Now that's only if you have the ultra uber expensive Shodan account. And that's where Shodan has tagged it or identified it as a honeypot. Right? Again, we're not going to have that here. If we go back to do something like TCP 502, right? Um, that um, well, that looks really weird. Let's go back and run it like this, like we did earlier. Oh, because I did TCP 502, not port. That was my fault. Um, sometime we'll see if we can get one to jump out. Um, Sometimes they're pretty easy to find, and sometimes they're not. And I don't want to waste a lot of time looking for them, but you will actually see them labeled honeypot. And how it identifies a honeypot is looking for telltale signs of a system that looks like it's many different types of systems because a lot of times people deploy a honeypot solution like Conpod and Teapot. Those are two open source honeypot platforms, and they turn on all the features. So they're saying, make this look like 30 different systems. Well, if Shodan hits that IP address, it looks and says, you're trying to be 30 different machines on one IP address. That just isn't realistic. So you're a honeypot. That's how it knows that, for the obvious cases, whether it's a honeypot or not. If a honeypot is done really well, no, you're not going to be able to tell right there. It's there to be attacked. So hopefully that helps. So. So Ben asks, is it one of the reasons why a PLC must be in run mode is if you're doing something that requires it to be in programming mode? So those are different, and it's a little outside the scope. And I know we're already running out of time, but yeah, PLCs have different operational modes. Run mode is for when it's actually in production, right? It's running its code, right? Program mode is where you put it to program, and also program mode is where you can also upload firmware to it. So think if an attacker wanted to upload malicious firmware to your PLC, especially if it's exposed to the internet. If it's in program mode, they would be able to do it. If it's in run mode, you can typically make changes to the code, the programming of the PLC, but you can't upload firmware. If you're not, and think of the firmware as the operating system, right? For these embedded systems, right? So but just something to think about. Now, I do want to look over at ZoomEye as well, because again, this is one I think a newer tool that's kind of gaining in popularity, and I find it I always find it more interesting just to look at things from the different like I follow security companies like Dragos, right? I'm a big Dragos fan, all their research but they're still a very American-based company. It's very different than if you're, following Kaspersky, right, which is a Russian company or a company in China that does research, right? Because while they're kind of tracking a lot of the same things, they're also looking at them from very different different perspectives. Right. I remember I was just talking with somebody that, they have plants in both the United States and China. And he was, joking. He's like, yeah, we always joke that, in the United States, right, we're always worried about keeping China out of our plants. When we're in China, we're always worried about keeping the US out of our plants. Right. And so when looking at the different platforms, it's interesting to see, like, again, they're very similar, but they also have very different perspectives. ZoomEye also, and I'm sure it's only a matter of time before Shodan adds something like this as well. But they're saying they're actually giving you like this little GPT interface where you can tell it what you're looking for. Like a lot of times, for those of you that have seen, a couple of my talks or presentation, I talk about Frosty Goop a lot. And Frosty Goop, if you're not familiar, is where the Russians created a very simple piece of malware they used it to turn off the heating in 600 apartment buildings in Ukraine for 2 days. This was January last year. And so they lost heating in these apartment buildings for 2 days, right? Just in the middle of winter, sub-zero temperatures, right? And but again, it was very simple. And they targeted these essentially these PLCs or controllers called from a vendor called Enco. So I'm gonna say I want to find these Enco controllers in in the or in Ukraine. And then we can hit boom, right? And then it's gonna say, oh, okay, here's the ZoomEye search. And then just click here if you want to run the search itself. Like, oh, okay, cool. And then in this case, it says, well, we didn't find anything. It's like, well, okay, that wasn't very helpful. You can also see they actually have a filter for hide honeypot. So going back to if they determine the system is a honeypot, they'll just hide it from the results for you. So this is kind of interesting. So and this is where I think, yeah, they're going to work on, there's some work to do, right? Because if we can type in this goes back to just typing in the vendor name, right? Where I can just type in, oh, Enco. Then we can see any time where we come across the word Enco in text. Now, a lot of times, right, this is just for um, encoded, right? Well, that's not going to help, right? Because there's a ton of hosts. So um, if we go and search by country, though, and then we can also, if we, no, I don't need to chat. Thank you. Oh, it's so slow. Here, what we'll do, let's go look at it in Shodan while we're waiting then. Let me switch over. We'll look at it. Okay. So here's the Shodan. If I just type in Enco, right, the name, I guess, and this is probably shows that I'm much more familiar with Shodan. But if I put in the vendor name Enco, you can see we get these 200 devices basically, right? And you can see 105 are in the Ukraine. The scary thing is that this number is increasing over time. It's not decreasing. This should be going down, not up. But this is one of the assets we simulate in the pen test, the OT pen test course that I do. And if we go to one of these, right, we can actually, see a little bit more, right? It's like, oh, okay, it has port 23 open and 1024, right? So we can actually connect to telnet, right, on these devices and be able to do things like look at how the system is functioning. We can look at what they call the inputs and the outputs, the memory, the data in memory that shows what's it monitoring, right? What's it controlling in the environment. And then you can change that even without ever being asked for a username and password. Some of these also have Modbus exposed, so you can also connect to them over Modbus and do that. Right? It looks like you only need a password if you're configuring a port or restarting the device. That's it. You can still make lots of changes though by just um, connecting to it over Telnet and interacting with the IOs with those inputs and and outputs. So, oh yeah, I didn't. It's the only thing again I don't like about this platform. But here's where you go to that one specific controller from Enco, and these are the ones that were targeted. Again, you can look, and many of them have Modbus exposed as well. Some don't. Like they probably have Modbus walled off behind a firewall, but they still have Telnet open, right? And you could sure you could Telnet to that device, and it doesn't ask you for a username and password. Or it'll ask you for a password if you try to configure a port or reset the device, but that's it. So we find a lot of these assets that are exposed to the internet. Now, in the Frosty Goop example, the attackers actually, the controller was not exposed to the internet. I should specify. They actually did essentially break into the network and then found the controller and then manipulated it from there. But so just to clarify. But in this case, right, these are exposed to the internet, right? And they are that much more vulnerable, right? They're that much more exposed. I was trying to see if I can find one. Here you can see, let me share this one real quick because here's one that you'll see does actually have Modbus exposed. So you can connect to it over port 23 and make changes, or you could connect to it over Modbus and make changes with tools like the Modbus Swiss Army knife that I have and play with that a lot in the OT pen test, and it's now integrated into the Getting Started in OT ICS course. Oh, which I should mention, we're doing the accelerated boot camp this Thursday and Friday. So it's the last live training for this year. So I'm actually excited about that. So, but just to throw that out there, and anybody's free Thursday, Friday. So, um, let's see. Mohammed, thanks for coming. David, good to see you. Adityan asks, in this given situation, was NetCloud a switch router connected to the Rockwell? It probably was something like that. Yeah, it was probably making it available. Yeah, I suspect. So it was like some device that was front ending the PLC. We didn't like start poking because that's, I don't, we don't have authorization to test those systems. So we don't go poking around. That's why I like Shodan or tools like Zoom, so you can still see things on the internet without, right, poking them. Because remember, these systems are controlling something, and I would, you know, God forbid, think like you start poking around, and that controls something like in a hospital, and then somebody got hurt or killed because of something that you were uh, doing, right? Obviously, not something that we would want to have happened. So, but yeah, so again, so ZoomEye is interesting, right? Because it definitely is a little bit different. I think the ChatGPT like help you find the search. I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. We could try another one. Um, Again, and it's interesting, it just runs searches against, like, the same IP ranges and see, the the differences um, between the 2. But, like, in this case, and let me make sure we're looking at the right page, right? And then, um, maybe we can just do something like, let's see. No, device equals PLC. So these are ones that they had. How am I not logged in? Hold on. I'm using the same browser. Okay, I'm logged in. I don't know. Show me all PLCs in, say, in the United States. And this is where you can see it's just looking for country US and then some where they think it's a PLC. So we can run that search and see what it actually comes up with. And it actually looks like it's done a fairly good job, right? And it says it looks like they think they found 6,400 PLCs. And then you can even see numbers over time. Sorry, I'm adjusting to have the dog in my lap. He had surgery last week, so he's still he still needs to be babysat. So poor thing. Um, so we can see, right, Schneider Electric, right? It's a network module for the PLC. We can, which means basically it's probably an add-on component to give it Ethernet capabilities, so you can give it a IP address, right? Generic vendor, right? So there's some interesting ones that you can actually look into, like the Siemens S7 line is their PLCs. I don't think I've ever seen a 200. I've seen 300s and 1200s and 1500s. So, um, but you start to get the idea, right? And you can see, like in this case, oh, it found this Siemens device, and that's over TCP 102, which is the port that we use for S7, right? Which is the Siemens protocol. It's like the Siemens version of Modbus, if you will, right? Here's another 502, right? So here's another one for Modbus, right? That S7, S7, S7. I'm trying to see if there's like any really cool, interesting ones that pop out. So I was trying to find one with a really interesting web interface. The other way to cheat to find PLCs by their web interface is to actually, well, use Google, so not Shodan or ZoomEye, but you can run a search for a URL on one of those interfaces. So if make sure I'm using the right window again. So if I go and run a search for a URL that I know is on a Rockwell PLC, right? We can run that search, and then you can actually see we get a list of like 40, 30, 40 PLCs, right? Here's the public IP address. You can see I've visited that one before. PLC, right? Public IP address, public address. Here's probably vendor documentation for the Rockwell, right? Rockwell, right? All these different PLCs, and you can just click on it, right? And then it will actually take you to. You can see in this case, it's the TCP connections page for the PLC. So we can see that people are connected to the PLC on port 80. Well, that's the web page, right? That's yeah, this is my public IP address. That's me. But we also see people connecting over SIP Ethernet IP. So it's like, who's this? Right? This 72.250.28.18. Now, it's kind of in the same internet neighborhood as the public IP address of the PLC. So it might actually be another system at this company. So they could, and I see this a lot, right? They're actually allowing their systems to talk over the internet without any protection. And then you can also see, oh yeah, there's also internal connections, because the internal IP address of that one PLC is 192.168.1.17, and then it's also talking with 192.168.1.42 internally. So yes, if I can see your internal IP address is not good, is it going to allow me to take complete control over your network? No, but it's still it just shows there's a security gap that you need to close, right? Like this PLC does not need its interface exposed to the internet. Plus the fact that if you look at the copyright statement, right? See, copyright statement is from 2009, which means this firmware is probably from 2009, which means, yeah, it would have all of those vulnerabilities that have been found in the last what, 16 years. So, and I'm sure there are a few, more than a few vulnerabilities that have been found for this PLC in the last 16 years, right? So, oh, and of course I didn't share the other screen, of course. Ugh, like I said, it's the only problem that I have with this one um, platform. So here's that page where you can connect to the PLC and see like the TCP connections, and you can see who's connecting to it from which public IP addresses and over what protocols. Again, here you can see, yeah, the copyright's from 2009. And if you really want to see even, well, what type of PLC is it? Right? We know it's Rockwell, right? But well, if I just go to the public IP address on the PLC itself, and then, oh, they're actually not exposing that. Well, good for them. It's just exposing everything else on the PLC, of course. So at least the I guess the main page isn't there. But that's one way you can find PLCs as well. So I was hoping we'd be able to find one of those web interfaces uh, in the portal or in Shodan or ZoomEye, but sometimes it takes a little bit of searching. So so yeah, it's not as easy as it used to be. It used to be really easy to find control systems on the internet. Where yeah, there's a lot less these days, which is a good thing. Like I said, I it's almost like the number is starting to creep back up, or I would just wonder if we're kind of at like the low point, like the lowest we'll ever be, and then it just kind of fluctuates a little bit, kind of up and down. So but hopefully that gives you a little bit idea, right, of between, Shodan and ZoomEye, that they have. And oh yeah, thanks LinkedIn. LinkedIn user. I feel bad not knowing everybody's names. Yeah, you can find the sign up for the class this Thursday, Friday, and for all my classes. I don't. Here's the URL to MikeHolcomb.com. It's all there, thanks to my girlfriend. But yeah, so um, we have yeah, this Thursday, Friday. So it's the 3day class, but compressed into an accelerated format for Thursday, Friday. I don't have any dates released for next year yet. Actually, because I'm balancing with a couple of clients and have a couple big projects, so I'm trying to work with clients and get that scheduled, and then I can schedule training around that. But I have some really exciting projects coming up early next year. So really cool. And then of course we have B-Sides ICS in February and the S4 conference. I'm going to be speaking there, which is really exciting. So hopefully for folks that are going to be in Miami in February, hopefully we'll see everybody there. So, but any other questions? Just drop them in the chat. I know we have a couple minutes, but again, that was really just to kind of jump on and talk about using Shodan. Take a peek at ZoomEye if you want on, and I'll put my YouTube channel in there as well. I know some folks are already watching over there. So if you look for either utilsec or Mike Holcomb on YouTube, take out the the semicolon. Sorry about that. There's actually a two-part video on using Shodan that you'll find there. And then the entire OSINT course, which is I think about 11 hours in total. If you really want to get into OSINT and finding control systems on the internet, you'll find that there as well. Anonymous LinkedIn user. I wonder if you can't see the link if you're not like kind of like if you're an anonymous. I hate to say, but just go to MikeHolcomb.com or ping me on LinkedIn, and I can send you the link for there. Javier, good to see you. Yeah, thanks for coming. So, all right. Well, and that I guess is a wrap. So appreciate everybody for coming. Think next week we're going to talk about the results from the SANS ICS survey that they do every year. So we're going to dive into that and some of the different results. And I think it's some kind of interesting points that were made. So that's what we're going to talk about next week, and then we'll have to revisit schedules, I think, as we get closer to Christmas and New Year's. But definitely, we'll be here next Tuesday at noon on Eastern. So, thanks again, everybody, for coming. And again, reach out or connect on LinkedIn. I'll see some of you in class this Thursday and Friday. And again, we'll go from there.